right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Jacob Winograd, host of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, here with Mark Puls from Knocked Conscious, and of course, the one and only Scott Horton. And we're here for a special, sort of, kind of finale. Unfortunately, Shawn can't be with us tonight, but we wanted to. We did our 7-week book club series on this. Hold on, if I can. This book weighs a ton, so it takes two hands to hold in hand. You got yours, Mark? Yeah. Provoked. We did a book club here over at LCI, and I was joined by Mark and Shawn over the last few months going through this book, which was been awesome. And we thought a great way to sort of bookend this was to have Scott on for sort of a final discussion on not just the last section that we have to go through yet, but just the entirety of the book, and also just get a chance to talk to him about the whirlwind that you have probably been going through with the reception of this book, because you have really blown up over the last few months from it. But first of all, Scott, thanks for being here. How are you doing? How is what has the reception been like on your end? Do you think it's been mostly positive or negative, mixed bag?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you both very much for having me tonight and for all your interest in this thing and the whole book club deal that you've done here on behalf of the book and all that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all that. And then, that's essentially a microcosm of the whole thing. I mean, the reaction's really been great, which is good because I hate writing books and they take just forever. And this thing was such a slog. And the whole time I was thinking, well, them bad words better like this thing, that's the same thing I thought on my first book that I wrote about Afghanistan as well. Like, man, I sure hope that there's some bang for this buck. So, yeah, no, it's been really great. If Jimmy Carter hadn't died and David Chappelle hadn't talked about it on Saturday Night Live and boosted Jimmy Carter's book up to #1 for just a few weeks there, then I still would have been uncontested the #1 in War and Peace on Amazon this whole time for 3.5 months now. And
congratulations on that.
Thanks. And I'm still top 1,000 in books on Amazon and wait, did I have that right? No. Wait. Yeah, because it's like top 40. I'm still top 40 in all history books. And I think I'm like the other day I was like 700 and something in all books on Amazon, which at one point that got up to like the top 400, I think. At the height of the book when it first came out, I was at like number 262 on the whole website, something like that. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, it's been really great. And then, just like you guys with this book club project, it's taken everybody months to get through the thing. I mean, some people just devour the hell out of it right away, kind of back in November and December or whatever. But for most people, it's not that easy to devote that much time to a project like that. So the reviews from readers mostly are kind of trickling in now. And it's been very gratifying to see that, for example, when the stuff is in the news and people are commenting on Twitter, I see a lot of accounts that are not people I know, but are just, strangers from out there saying, no, you got to read this book. So in other words, the word is really getting around, kind of the word of mouth of the thing. And it's just published by the little old Libertarian Institute. And so we don't have some big publishing PR firm type deal. I don't know all the correct ways to get it in the right catalogs to get it out into the public. My other books are on Barnes and Noble. I don't know why this one isn't. Like, I haven't figured that out yet. Haven't put out a hardback yet. Haven't finished the audiobook yet. Still, all that's still in progress. And but anyway, so yeah, I don't know. It's pretty gratifying to see. And then criticism has
fun to watch it unfold, like in real time almost, as this is kind of winding down as we're reading it. And then Sachs jumps on and kind of reaffirms everything and almost says short synopsis of exactly what you wrote about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny about that because he's the only good guy that I badmouth in the book because he played some role in the shock therapy thing. But I also tell his side of the story, which is like, hey, that part wasn't my fault as best as I could too, which I think is largely right.
And he said he was shunned from he was told to leave the room, I think, or something. So he's trying to like distance himself from a lot of that shock therapy stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't approach that right. I remember I actually sent him an email asking him to comment on some of the stuff. And then I realized, only because I had a pile of 1 trillion tabs open. And I realized later that like, oh, I had his essay, What I Did in Russia. Oh, I had that tab open, but I just hadn't gotten to it yet. And I had totally forgotten about it. It'd been there sitting there for months waiting for me to finally get around to reading it. So I absolutely should have read that first and then gone back and reread all of his old stuff, because I found, he has on his website op-eds and things that he wrote back then saying, man, if we don't get rid of this communist head of the central bank, we're never going to get, be able to beat inflation and whatever. You know what I mean? So I wish I had taken all that into account and understood all that well before I ever contacted him for comment about it and whatever. So I kind of get the idea he doesn't like me anymore. And the thing is I know that he knows all of this stuff. Like, for example, I first really became aware of him mostly during the Syria war 10, 12, 13 years ago, where he was, as far as people who had that story right about who was who and what was going on and how crazy it all was, he was the most prominent guy who knew what he was talking about, who was allowed on TV. He would go on Morning Joe and say the truth. He's the only guy allowed, other than Dave Smith on SE Cup show on CNN at the time. But essentially that was it. And he was great on it. Really great. So I give him credit because I know he knows all the same stuff as me. But then sometimes when I hear him talking, I'm like, hey, you have been reading my book, dude. Cause like, I don't know, maybe not. But
it's funny to watch it though.
I'm
Once
just
again,
jealous.
it's like with Sachs, it is pretty funny just watching him kind of just clearly, and you're like, wait, I heard that somewhere.
I mean,
Wait, I heard that somewhere. And he's like, wait, and he even talks back even Vietnam and before, prior to even the Syria stuff.
And look,
and now he's hated by Democrats. So
I'm not
he's hated by
a unique journalist on this stuff, right? Like my book is all a compilation of everybody else's journalism. So it's not exactly a unique take. It's just the truth, right? So, but then like when he's on Tucker Carlson, I could swear that he just read Enough Already and Provoked, and he's just telling my story to the dude. And I'm just like, oh man. But I know that's probably really not right. It's just he sounds exactly like me, only a lot of the time he can say, yeah, it was my friend who did it. And then I went there and they admitted it to me. And, this kind of thing, which is something that he had told me in an interview years ago, that after, for example, the fake revolution of 2014, that he went to Kiev and all the NGO guys took him on a tour around where they bragged about it and said, we were the ones who did it and whatever. So, anyway, I don't know.
That's that tour that JD Vance talked about, right? That golden tour that they get to walk him around.
Yeah. You know what I did too, though, with Sachs is when I first sent the PDF out to be reviewed by friends, the first paragraph of the shock therapy section was poorly written and wrong and had him like being part of a thing under Gore, which was not right. That all came later. And so my assumption was he read that and was just like, well, screw this. This is stupid if he doesn't even know that. And he's going to sit here and get me wrong on something, which as soon as I sent it, I was like, ow, I don't know if it was as soon as it was. I don't remember exactly, but it was pretty soon after that anyway that I realized.
You had a chance to reach out to him about it in any of the conversation?
No, I haven't talked to him. I think I tried to send him a conciliatory email, like trying to apologize for whatever, but he never got back to me. But whatever, man. Anyway, point is, I'm just glad everybody's, out there saying the same thing as me, because I'm right. And so it's just helping to reinforce, the overall narrative that actually this is the correct take, not the other one. Same as like Pierce Morgan had Jeffrey Sachs on, and then me, and then the next day Dave, and then I think the next day another guy who was good on it, I forget exactly, but like, so then you could say, well, this is just redundant. Like, why have Sachs and Horton and Smith all on in a row? But then my thing is like, no, that's great. Because the truth is, everyone ought to be able to see that nobody can really step to us when it comes to the facts and the argument. Nobody knows it better than we do. And we're the ones who are right. And they're left unable to answer our questions at the end.
You're still watching peers just circle the drain. What are you doing, man? So we should have had him in NATO earlier. So we should have given more force earlier. Dude, come on, man. It's played out. It's just played out.
Right. And you know what? As long as I'm, rambling about that, I think the same is true for Israel and Palestine too. People act like the right wing has to just be completely gay married to Israel forever. But why? There's no real reason why. And you remember it was difficult, very difficult for the American right to get over the war in Iraq. They even supported torture if W. Bush told them, of course we support torture. It's not torture, but of course it's torture. And of course we support it. All good American patriots do. And they had a hard time breaking from that and saying, geez, we were wrong about that. Or that wasn't me. That was my friends all agreed with that, but I don't remember supporting that war or, whatever to make that break. But when they did,
that's the one that broke me, my friend, I'm 50. So that's the one where I was enlisting in, 97, just missed the physical. And then all my friends, everybody else went. And then I was like, what is this in hindsight? I had a Hey Saddam, this Scuds for You t-shirt.
Yeah.
Like I remember like 16, like running around the first Kuwait invasion and gas being $1.50. $1.50. I was going crazy. It was like 50 cents more than it was or something, How would this get propagandized?
Iraq War I, Operation Yellow Ribbon, it was like more about us than it was anything going on over there. It was getting Americans conditioned back into being the global policeman at that time. And they said that was a huge part of it. We got to beat the Vietnam syndrome. We got to give them a short, victorious war to get the people's head straight about America's responsibility to fight wars forever after Vietnam. But
it's so funny watching you on sort of like a tour of debates and appearances, now almost semi-regular on the Piers Morgan show since the book came out. And like people run into you and like you're seeing this weird like I don't know what to think about the corporate media, if it's dying or if it's just like a corpse that like doesn't realize it's dead or something. And it comes into clash with you and you see these people, they don't know what to do because they're used to having control of the narrative and people not knowing the facts. Like your debate with a Niall Ferguson, which is actually funny because that aired the last time you were on this show. But like I went and watched that and it was just like it's so funny. It's like watching a bunny like jump into like a wood chipper, right? I mean, it's just like he just says things, doesn't have any idea who you are, just pulls out the typical, like, oh, it's unfortunate that Mr. Horton repeated some, Putin Kremlin talking points there, and just like, okay, and you're, and like, your stuff, so you're just like, where other people would just get flustered and be like, oh, wow, I mean, I'm just anti-war, but maybe I'm falling, victim to some propaganda. You're able to actually like go, no, this isn't Kremlin talking points. Here are all the people who said, like, I think he brought that up when you said the whole, it was promised not to expand NATO, and here's all the details. He was like, oh, it's just one conversation in a series of conversations. And you were like, okay, actually, no, it was like, 10 conversations with a bunch of different people over a long period of time. And people kept bringing it up later on as well and referencing it. So I mean, it's just crazy. Like what, like, I'm sure that has to be a little bit surreal for you. Like you would think at some point the people would at least make the propaganda more sophisticated, maybe like, realize that they can't just revert to like a couple talking points to just scare people into compliance. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I appreciate if you think that they're going to have to adapt something because of something I said. But I think, I'm reminded when you're talking here about my first debate was against a low tier neocon named Harvey Kushner, who I actually had never heard of before at the time. But he was like some, pal of Frank Gaffney or some scumbag like that, And I debated him at Texas A&M in 2008, like right before the election of 08. I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah. Because I'm like, yeah, no, there's an economic crash coming and Barack Obama's just like John McCain and all that is in the debate. But see, when I first started doing the interview show, it was on pirate radio. And on top of that, like punk rock pirate radio, where all my friends were just drinking Lone Star and playing their friends' bands and having a good time up there. And I had, I was Mr. Politics boy with the interview, anti-war show and all that. But then just a couple of different times I interviewed some bad guys, and I would always kick their ass. And then they would say, because they're bad guys, I guess it's just built in. They go, "Oh yeah, well, I'm going to call the FCC on you because I know a friend that works at the FCC, and we're going to look into this 95.9 FM, man. Because that's just how they are. They're bitches, and that's how they react to getting beat down. So then I thought, well, I can't get my friend's radio station in trouble by picking a fight with these kooks. And really, like, what people really need to hear is what Gareth Porter has to say. Everybody already heard all the Hawks say all their crap all day. They can always find the other side of the story. But I really just want to have Gareth Porter on to talk about what's true and let that be, and then he ain't going to call the cops on me and my friends for doing having a radio station. So, but then, long story long, is that then by 2008, when I debated Kushner at Texas A&M, I hadn't really been tested against any bad guys in a while. And I kind of thought I knew some things about Iraq War II and why I didn't like it and whatever. But how would I actually do up against, an educated guy from the other side? I didn't really know. And when I went up there, in fact, it's funny, I'm only remembering this now that we're talking about it. We kind of spoke before the thing, and he let me know how, what a big shot he was and how he had a PhD and all this stuff. And I told him, well, I dropped out of community college. I'm sure you'll have no problem with me, And then I kicked his ass. The only thing was I got stoned. And so in the first answer, I spaced out, forgot what the hell I was talking about. And then I was like, oh, yeah, no, democracy. Oh, yeah, you put the Shiites in charge and you call that democracy. Well, that's just two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for lunch, buddy, blah, blah, blah. And then I was okay again. But that was my only real screw up. And then at the end, he refused to even shake my hand because I beat his ass so bad, talking about how Israel helped to create Hamas to divide and conquer the Palestinians and whatever. And he was just destroyed. And that was he was my first little Bill Kristol trial run there, I guess,
Yeah, Bill Kristol was my go-to. And now it's funny because you mentioned pirate radio too. Now it's like this new controversy where you come up out of John Dvorak and Adam Curry's mouth now. I don't know if you heard them talking smack. I'm sure Dave mentioned it to you, but yeah, I think Dave brought it up. And I'm like, what's going on here? I would feel you guys would be kind of aligned here somehow.
Well, what's funny is I believe them that they've never heard of me, but I actually used to be on the No Agenda stream. My show came on right after theirs in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. So I guess, I never talked to either of them. I had only spoken to, I don't remember the guy's name now. They had 2 or 3 of their guys that worked for them who, I had dealt with. And then they wanted to start charging me for being on there. And I was like, yeah, well, that ain't going to happen. So I just went off. But, so I think that's kind of funny that I was actually on the No Agenda stream thing for a while back a decade ago, and they still had no idea who I am anyway. And then, I don't know. They didn't really understand who I am or what I was talking about. They acted like because I was complaining about Bob Woodward. This always bothers me when people do this. That oh, you're just figuring this out for the first time, even though, quite likely nothing you said indicated that you're only figuring out whatever thing that you're saying for the first time just now. You're just saying it. Yeah, Bob Woodward, is bad on quotes sometimes. Oh, you're just figuring this out? Well, did I say I was just figuring this out or what? What a weird thing to criticize me for. I mean, the lore is that he just completely lied and pretended that he got these quotes from William Casey on his deathbed in the hospital back in 1983 or whatever. And I've known that since 89 or something. I've known that my whole life. Oh, Bob Woodward, the guy who made up quotes of Bill Casey when he was in a coma, on death's door. Yeah, right. He just happened to confirm everything Woodward wanted him to, or whatever it was.
Deep throat, Scott, but deep throat. He broke it.
But the thing is, whatever, man, Bob Woodward is still somewhat useful sometimes. In Bush at War, I mean, a lot of that is just straight reproducing the transcripts of the notes of the National Security Council meetings. And he didn't take them. It's the note takers that work for the White House that took the notes. And W. Bush told them, give everything to Bob. We like Bob. And so he just republished them. And so there you can see Donald Rumsfeld saying, we have to bomb the Taliban as well as Al-Qaeda. not Al-Qaeda and exclude the Taliban, because we want to make the war bigger so we can keep it going longer so we can take it to Baghdad. Guys, if we win the war now and the American people think the war is already won, then how in the hell are we ever going to go after Saddam Hussein? And like all of this stuff is all right in there, right? These conversations. So that stuff is useful. And then other times he's quoting whichever officials. His book on what's it called? It's called Obama's Wars, but it's not about Obama's wars at all. It's about McChrystal and Petraeus and Mullen and them rolling Obama and forcing him to escalate Afghanistan in the year 2009. That's what the whole book is about. And it's full of all kinds of, juicy quotes that then these principles never contradicted. They never said, hey, I never said that or what. And so like, I don't know, you can't, if it ain't gospel, but like some of it's useful. You're going to throw out every Bob Woodward book. Like he has access. He gets to talk to the principals of the National Security Council, at the highest level and sometimes for days at a time. Right.
And that's where the manufacturing consent comes in, right? Because it's like, if you don't play ball within a certain range, you're out of those meetings, right?
That's right.
So you got to be in to do that, right? You got to pay play.
That's right. And look, it doesn't mean that everything that he says that they said is true. And it doesn't mean that what they said is true. But it just means that the truth is Bob Woodward said they said this. And that has a certain amount of value to it anyway, right? Like that itself is a new story.
It's like when you had your two conversations with General Wesley Clark. And it was like, you guys are having a debate, but it's almost like the only debate is on the conclusions you make on the facts that you pretty much 100% agree upon. Like in both your conversations, it's not like he ever said, well, actually, Scott, you got this wrong and I was there and I know better than you. And I can say, no, it's just pretty much you'd bring up stuff and he'd be like, yeah, that's right. And then he'd bring up stuff. He'd be like, yeah, that's right. And then he'd be like, so don't you agree that like we kind of provoked this and we need to take a different track with doing this? And he'd be like, oh, well, yeah, but we just can't let Russia get away with it, which is just like, a very non-committal answer. But it's funny because when you go up against someone like that, like someone like General Wesley Clark is also someone who's useful to cite, even though he's not, coming to the right conclusions.
Right. And look, so back
to 7 countries in 5 years is one of the greatest things. And then I hear him talk to you on peers and he's out of his mind.
Yeah.
Out of his mind. It's crazy.
He did confirm that was all about Israel. That was the clean break plan. It was that same plan that we're talking about, which, Amy Goodman.
They dusted it back off, right? It brought back up to me. It kept, was it Wolfowitz, right? It kept rolling back up, right? Or some thing he kept.
And then, so speaking of Bill Kristol is, I did great in that debate, whatever. The thing is, Bill Kristol completely failed, right? Like if you were a dues paying member of the war party, you'd be pissed that the boss dropped the ball that bad up against that punk from antiwar.com. You know what I mean? But maybe that was just his weakness and maybe Harvey Kushner's weakness. But then I whooped Wesley Clark too. And as he said, like that wasn't as much of a fight. That wasn't as much of a fight because even though like he helped lead a war, I can't really there's not as deep a vendetta as there is against Bill Kristol, who, helped to, just for the things that he said about Ron Paul alone, right? Like I owed him a vendetta on behalf of us all and that kind of thing. Whereas
someone who serves, I will say, someone who serves at least puts their money where their mouth is. Like I can at least accept that as that's their ideology or something. But someone who pushes others to die for them, like a Bill Kristol, no, I don't accept that.
I mean, Hackworth
for democracy, Mark.
Yeah, and just for the historical record here, Colonel David Hackworth called Wesley Clark a perfumed prince and a politician and a big, P word. Douglas McGregor, on the other hand, worked for him and has respect for the guy for what it's worth. Says he's not the worst and one of the more intelligent of the 3 or 4 star generals at that level. But as you say, though, on the facts, he had to say, well, yeah, that is right. However, though, I don't like your interpretation because I prefer mine instead, was essentially all he was left with. But that should go to show everybody else, too, that, see, we can all do this. Like, I ain't special. Like, the deal is you just read antiwar.com all the time, and any one of us can whoop any one of them because they're all completely wrong and full of it. It's, I mean, just think of the wars that we've been in. The USA stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years, but I was right that was stupid and we shouldn't the whole time. And eventually, finally, everyone came to agree with me, but I said that the whole time, and so did a lot of other people too. We should not be there. We got no business there. The Taliban didn't attack us. Al-Qaeda did, and that's different, and et cetera, and all of these things, and how it ain't ever going to work, that we put together a coalition of minorities to oppress the plurality of a population of the country. The whole project was completely stupid. But here's the thing. Once you come around and agree with me about Afghanistan, well, you're never going back now, because now you're right. Before you were wrong. Now you get it, that this really is, look, we can pacify the Pashtuns with H-bombs, or we can quit trying, because those are the actual choices for winning that war. So just forget it, right? That was always the answer. Now, once you come to that conclusion finally with me, there's nothing that anyone could say to you to persuade you back the other way, And all I'm saying is it's the same with all of this stuff. You heard in that debate with Bill Kristol, and I people give me too much credit for that debate because I totally flubbed this. He brought up Bosnia, and I went, actually, they screwed up the Lisbon deal, and I didn't even get the details right. I like made a hash of my retelling of the Lisbon deal there, when the real point was that right then, of course, what did he just do? He just surrendered the entire field to me. He wouldn't even stand by Kosovo, which the Weekly Standard said, we got to kick the Serb skulls in if they dare to oppose our might and our will in the Dayton deal. And much less standing by Afghanistan, which he demanded we go and stay and supported the surge and all of those things under Obama too. He said, all hail Obama. That was what Bill Kristol said when he announced this surge in Afghanistan. And of course was one of the principal architects, no less than Paul Wolfowitz or Donald Rumsfeld or George W. Bush, in putting together Iraq War II and running the Project for New American Century, and all of his buddies at AEI. Justin Raimondo called it the axis of crystal that made that war happen. That's exactly right. The little Lenin of the neoconservatives, Justin called him. And he couldn't stand behind any of it. And of course, he supported Libya and supported Syria and all of these interventions, and he couldn't stand behind any of it. And there I'm going, actually, blah, 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 blah about the Lisbon deal, when what I should have said was, wow, did you hear that, everybody? Like, first of all, Bosnia was a big screw job where America took the side of Al-Qaeda, and it was a disaster, and all of this, and he was a huge supporter of it, and we still are.
Globalized bin Ladenism, correct? I mean, to that extent, it globalized, it brought it out of Afghanistan, out of the Middle East, and spread it. Not only, it's even worse, because it's not even the people, it's the message got spread in addition, and that's always the dangerous part, right?
At least, as we read in this book, as Scott detailed, at least at every point, when, Russia and the rest of the world was dealing with a problem of bin Ladenites and the Mujahideen, at least we, joined efforts to fight them, right? Right? And put them down. We didn't fight them in the Middle East while funding and supporting them to continue fighting Russia throughout the last couple decades.
I mean, that's the thing of it too. It's such an irony. And I know that at this point, the 9/11 truther narrative is so dominant. I seem like a kook for not supporting it. In fact, I saw there's a recent or semi-recent 1-star review on Fool's Errand from a truther. It just says, I'm a kook for not believing that bin Laden was a CIA plant all along, or whatever. But the thing is, like, that guy's mostly right. You know what I mean? Like, the truth is, the US, the British, and the Saudis ran these guys, the International Islamist Brigades, really all along, from the really before Afghanistan, and the Safari Club operating in East Africa in the late 1970s, and then into Afghanistan in the 1980s with the International Islamist Brigades. And these are then, yes, the same Mujahideen who went to Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And a big part of how September 11th happened, as I talk about in the book, is the Minneapolis office could have tied the whole thing together and ended the plot, stopped the plot if they'd been able to get a warrant against Moussaoui, and they couldn't get a warrant against Moussaoui because he was only tied to the terrorists in Chechnya. And the consensus in Washington is they're not terrorists. They're friends of ours, even though, in fact, they were tied directly to Osama bin Laden, who had already been since 1992 directly tied to American attacks against the United States, including at that time the Radisson in Yemen, then the first World Trade Center bombing, and later attacks on our troops in Saudi Arabia in 1995 and 1996, the Africa Embassy attacks of August of 1998, and then they still backed them in Kosovo in 99, and then they still backed them in Chechnya after that, and then, but see, the deal is, first of all, I don't think that the Americans, well, first of all, there's just no solid proof. There's only a lot of implications. And I just don't think it would have to be Dick Cheney. And I don't think he's got the courage to arrange an attack on New York City and kill thousands of people. He'd be just as likely to get himself coup d'etat and shot for that and Riyadh nuked.
Well, my answer to that is negligence can still be criminal.
And this is the thing. I think a couple of things going on there is, one, we kind of like the bin Ladenites because they do a lot of our dirty work against the Russians even now, right?
Like in Syria.
and we don't want to focus too heavily on them because we want to focus on Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. And this is why, it's folklore, but it's true too. Like, I mean, there's enough basis for all of this reporting that all summer long in 2001, the summer of Gary Condit and the shark bite, that the CIA was trying to warn the White House that there's a big attack coming, and we think it even could be here, and we really need to get a principals level meeting about this and get the ball rolling on this. And the neocons were saying, don't listen to the CIA. If we go to Afghanistan after bin Laden, then we're never going to get to Baghdad. It's going to be a huge diversion from the real goal, which is Iraq. And so what is Al-Qaeda going to do? Set off a truck bomb somewhere? Screw that. We don't have to worry about that. And so, and the bin Ladenites, this is in Ali Soufan's book, The FBI Agent. I quote him in the book where he says, the Chechen terrorists complained to bin Laden, we don't understand why you want to mess with America. They helped us in Afghanistan. They helped us in Bosnia, in Kosovo. Now they're helping us in Chechnya. And you want to hit them? And bin Laden says, yeah, well, you don't understand, because he has this larger kind of Leninist vision of this world revolution, starting with attacking the United States primarily for occupying Saudi Arabia in order to bomb and blockade Iraq. And of course, supporting Israel in their war crimes against the Palestinians and the Lebanese. And so he had this larger vision and agenda. And so it made sense then that the Americans thought that mostly he's on our side. And so, and if he was going to attack us, it was going to be over there somewhere with a truck bomb or something anyway. And so who really cares about that? And so they turn their blind eye. There's also evidence that the CIA and the Saudis were maybe trying to recruit these guys to be double agents when really they were single agents or triple agents going ahead and still, doing their plot. Some of these guys have been followed from Malaysia to Bangkok straight to LA back a year and a half or so before the attack. And were obviously well known to the CIA, who followed them all the way here. And then Saudi intelligence and presumably CIA while they were here. The degree of FBI knowledge of them and exactly what they were up to is in dispute. But anyways, the point being that if you, without going all the way to like America and Saudi did 9/11, help do that on purpose, then you still have a situation where America always backs Osama bin Laden, except right after September 11th and during Iraq War II, when Zarqawi was leading the worst part of the Sunni insurgency against our guys in Iraq War II, and we're fighting them there. But all the rest of the time, including like almost immediately after that, W. Bush went back to their side, started backing Fatah al-Islam in Lebanon and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and Jandala in Iran, right back on the side of the bin Ladenites by the end of 2005, beginning of 2006. So, what can you say, man? I don't know. You got Al-Qaeda when was the big suicide attack in Afghanistan where the Al-Qaeda guy blew up like 10 CIA officers and their friends there? And they, like, 1 year later, they're backing them in Libya. In fact, just as they're killing Osama bin Laden in Pakistan in May of 2011, they're already getting started backing his guys, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia, who just got home from Iraq War II, where they fought against America and the Shiites. Now they come home to Libya, and America's taking their side, taking bin Laden's men's side right when they're capping him. And
wasn't that also the same thing where the Pentagon's backing one of the sects and the CIA's backing the other, and they're fighting each other even at times?
Well, yeah, and that was in Syria a couple of years later, where the Pentagon was backing the Syrian Kurds, the SDF, and the YPG, and then the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, they called it. And yes, they were fighting CIA-backed bin Ladenites in Afrin, it's called, like the headache medicine.
It's crazy.
And that's the headline in the Los Angeles Times. Anybody can find that. CIA-backed forces battle DOD-backed forces in Syria.
Well, and this comes down to, because I feel like on one hand your book obviously lays out a lot of the different weaves of the history, debunking certain propaganda, explaining the color revolutions. I mean, there's so much in there. It's funny, at one point we were in the middle of the book club, it was kind of like every week I got on, I was like, I feel like we're talking about the same stuff we talked about last week. It's a different location now, right? When you're going from
Groundhog Day, we kept
Revolution
saying,
to the Orange Revolution up to the Maidan. I was just like, by the time we get to the Maidan Revolution, you're just like, wow, like they just really got this down to a science now, right? Like at that point, the democratic regime change infrastructure, which is now under assault by Trump, which we'll get to towards the end here, but it was a fine-tuned machine there, and all that stuff. Like I hate to gloss over it, but like as we found out, and as you found out writing it, it takes a lot to unpack all that. But at the very least, though, I think anyone reading your book through those sections would have to admit that, like, I always go back to that debate with, I forget the guy's name, where the guy, said to you, "Oh, I guess you just don't believe in democratic revolutions. They can't happen." And it's like, okay, hold on. Let's just be clear here. Were there some people in these various, revolutions that, on their own came to the conclusion or desire that they like wanted some kind of revolution or change in their country or nation? Sure. Okay. Yeah, I got it. But that doesn't change the fact that we can track all these. Not just that we can track, that these agencies, whether it's USAID, whether it's the NED or the NDI, that they all openly brag about and display how many millions of dollars they spent into the various projects into these different countries and regions for these different revolutions. And it's like, you can't, on one hand, be like, ooh, Russia spent, what was it, $100,000 or $1 million on Facebook ads, and that caused Hillary Clinton to lose the election in 2016. You can't say that with a serious face and then be like, oh, but the, hundreds of millions of dollars spent over a decade in these different, democratic revolutions just had no effect whatsoever.
Right. Man, what's funny is, like, I've argued with Democrats about this, where they really agree with what you just said sarcastically as completely ridiculous. Like, yeah, no, I mean, come on. You're saying that just because we, the U.S. government, spends all this money backing independent media over there, you're saying that then if anyone agrees with the things that they say, that they are just brainwashed and helpless, powerless, controlled people who have no will of their own. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, like, kinda, right? Like, I mean, are you telling me what's the point of spending all that money on all that media to get them to push that message, to change people's minds to agree with what the Americans want? And it only has to be semi-successful. Move the margin a few points and then claim a democratic revolution as you get a bunch of right-wing fascists to overthrow a democratically elected government. Call it whatever you want.
Right, yeah, the democratic revolution where Nazi flag-bearing militiamen occupy buildings and snipe their own citizens, and then
Well, I just love how like the soup kitchens, there were like soup kitchens in the Maidan Revolution. It was cold. There is no way there may have been organic 20 people that were really upset, but there's no way that became the size it did without the support that it had from the United States, from USAID.
Of course.
Not a single way.
It took millions of dollars, right? I mean, giant big screen TVs and a giant stage, essentially a permanent rock concert, hot meals and heaters and whatever, the whole deal, all the tents and all the infrastructure for all that came from these NGOs, all backed by USAID, NED, IRI and NDI and all the Soros groups, Renaissance Foundation and others.
And I ask a quick question that boggled my mind was the invasion of Crimea in 2014.
Yeah.
How many people died? How quote unquote many?
6.
6. 6. I heard that. I think you said on Piers or something, you or Dave mentioned, and I had to look that up right away. I'm like flipping out. Who doesn't mention invasion of Crimea, that huge invasion in 2014? We want to go back to pre-2011 borders or 1991. And you're like, what? Like, help me understand that.
Yeah, I remember Ray McGovern used to tell a story about, I think at his church, they were like doing a big remembrance ceremony for the poor people of Crimea. And he asked them, how many people do you think died? And they were like, oh, thousands, right? And he's like, no, actually nobody died. And he was wrong about that. It was a few. It was, I believe it was 2 Ukrainian, 2 Russian soldiers, and then 2 civilians who died in the thing. And then it was in dispute, like who killed the civilians, exactly what happened there. But
it was like Grenada.
It was
Honduras or whatever.
Essentially what happened was the Marines and the sailors just went outside and stood on street corners and said, okay, this is Russia again more. And then that was it. And they told the Ukrainians to leave. I remember there was footage of Russian soldiers firing a couple warning shots and telling some Ukrainian soldiers, you boys ought to just turn around and leave, dude. We don't want to fight. And there's no fight to be had here. You might as well just go. And they were like, all right then, and turned around and left. And so that was how that happened.
And that's when Azov started systematically bomb, like basically attacking the east from the west, right? Like just shooting.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a big part of the reason for the attack on the West, I mean, first of all, Obama and John Brennan, the head of the CIA, insisted on it. But I think the Americans and the new regime were both overreacting to the loss of Crimea and said, we got to get in there to the Donbass real quick and lock it down before the Russians have a chance. But they just failed at that. You know, I forget now if it was that acting president Churchnyov or if it was Poroshenko, because they changed power right there at the start of the war. Who said, well, we're just going to go in there and roust those bandits out. It'll just take a few days, you know, right? Like Operation Decisive Storm in Yemen that lasted for 8 years. And so it just turned into a massive war, and a huge part of the army defected to the other side and started fighting back. And, you know, it's a complete fact. It was absolute fact that was, you know, even CJ Chivers from the New York Times, who is a former Marine, I believe, captain, maybe higher ranking officer, and was an armaments expert. He went over there and verified, and he wasn't alone. I believe Conflicts Armaments Research said the same thing, that all this equipment is Soviet equipment that had belonged to the Ukrainian military and that defectors took with them when they switched sides in the Civil War. So that was where it all came from. It was not all Russian equipment coming from across the international border there.
So, you know, it's funny, the response everyone gives you when you push them to a point on this stuff is just like, well, Scott, have you ever been to Ukraine?
I wish I had said to Niall Ferguson that, like, well, you wrote a book about the Rothschilds. Have you ever been to the 19th century?
Right. Or it's like,
you know,
isn't your wife Ukrainian?
Yeah.
Well, what you should say is,
I don't invoke all that stuff because it
right. I mean, you're not there to dig that up, but I mean, it's like, hello, just look at your history. It's like, hey, take a look at my family tree, will you?
Well, I think the biggest point is just to say, you know what? I never been to Iraq either, but I was right about the weapons of mass destruction. Like, I was never, like, a whole lot of places that we've never been at, us anti-war libertarians, but we tend to keep getting things right. And look, it takes everyone else 20 years to catch up to where we're at.
And listen, the whole book is written from the point of view of a guy who I know that the burden of proof is on me. I'm sitting here telling you that every grown up with authority was wrong about everything for 40 years. Obviously, the burden of proof is on me. The whole book is written. Well, the Hawks claim this, but I say they're wrong, and here's why. Well, the Hawks claim that. And I say, see, they admit it. And the Hawks claim this. Well, that's a bunch of crap. And here's some other Hawks explaining why the first Hawks are liars and all of that. That's the way the whole book is written, of course. So, I actually flubbed this answer. I wish I'd given a better answer. My answer is more like what you just said, but in the debate with Eli Lake at Dartmouth, I wish I had said, because she actually did specifically ask this, and in the questioner in the audience, I should have said specifically that yes, there are many Ukrainian sources in the book. If you flip through it, you're not going to see a bunch of Cyrillic because I translated them all into English titles because none of my readers read Cyrillic, including me. And so I'm not going to have a bunch of foreign looking headlines in the footnotes. But if you look at the sources, you'll see that, what they are. There's plenty of Ukrainian news sources in there. And then if you look at scotthorton.org/provoked/notes, you can follow the hot links right to the originals and or the Google translations. And I guess I have the originals. You got to translate them yourselves. And I link to the original sources, whether it's Ukrainska Pravda or whatever. There's a bunch of them, Euromaiden Press and whatever. There's must be 100 of them. And so
your book is so loaded with information that if the names were just Smith and Jones and Johnson and Thompson, I'd still get lost. But no, it has to be Yushchenko and Parashklava and just buy me a freaking vowel or a consonant or help me figure this out. The places, the dates, it is so hard. That's what makes this if I call it a hard read, is that part. It's not about that it's hard to read. It is the information is you have to do a brain switch in your head to almost get these places and names to work properly.
Yeah, I've had people criticize me for using too many personal pronouns, where I just call people president this and secretary that and deputy secretary whatever, where, the common convention is you've already introduced these people. But come on, man, I'm introducing you to hundreds and hundreds of different people, including I like to name journalists by name, good and bad, and say this journalist reported in this publication the following facts and whatever, because it's important context to me. And so I think it's, as I reread it out loud for the audiobook, I can see where sometimes it's a little clunky, where, maybe I just introduced this guy a minute ago and I don't need to reintroduce him again yet. But whatever, I'm not really making those changes. I'm basically leaving that because I think people need a hand with that. When I tell you who this guy was, I don't want you to have to go paging back. Wait, who the hell is that again? And make it difficult. I'm not trying to make it difficult,
It definitely helped that you did that. Like I said, that's the only thing that made it a challenge, is just the names and the places like that.
Yeah.
Not the information.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you guys like it. I know that it's, vastly overly long. When I do finish all the corrections after I'm done reading the audiobook and make all the corrections, then I'm finally going to turn it in and I'm going to publish a second edition. I guess I'll have to write a new afterword about what happens in, early Trump 2 years here.
Well,
and then I'm going to put it out in hardback and a new properly sized paperback. So it'll be
what are your thoughts on this? What happened this week? What are your thoughts on that? Let's get a fresh take from, you probably haven't talked much about it.
And I want to bring up, there's a quote from the book I want to read to preface this, because you said at the end, in the rogue statist section near the end, you said maybe Trump, driven by pure spite toward the same national security state that tried to destroy him, really could get back in there and pull troops out of Europe and Asia, end the war in Ukraine, and make peace with Russia and China and finish what he never really started the first time. But would he, could he, or would the empire consume him all over again? Well, we're, a month and a half into this, and I mean, I don't want to count eggs before they hatch, but yeah, there's a lot that's popped off, not just in the last month, but in the last week on this stuff. And I want you to answer Mark's question, but I also want you to answer this, regardless of if it works out, and I never want to I think we're all annoyed sometimes at the MAGA, Trump idolization and things like that. But even I have to admit that even if he's still very flawed and I don't trust him, but there's just something different about him. Maybe it's just that he's
Oh yeah.
pissed off and angry and just like, the gloves are off and he's more willing to like not try to make friends with certain people or whatnot. But I don't know, man. That meeting with Zelensky and Vance, that was what did he say? That was good TV.
Yeah. Which is how he ended it, right?
Yeah.
You gotta love, the character of Trump at least, where he's like, and I don't mean his character, I mean the character of him.
Right.
He's like, well, this would be some good TV, I'll tell you that, because that's always where his head's at, But yeah, look, some guy tried to blow his head off. And I guess I believe him when he says God saved him to save the country. It's funny to hear him say that when he just finished talking about how some innocent guy got killed by the bullet that missed him. I'm like, geez, Jesus plays a tough game of cards, I don't know. But anyway, I think he's rationalized that like, how people do that, like everything happens for a reason, which is just a nice way of saying that, like, I'm gonna come up with some kind of justification for whatever just happened. You know what I mean? So and then look, I think I really don't know what the hell went on with that Pennsylvania thing. I'm afraid to begin to speculate. There seems to be some weird strangers around that kid based on some cell phone data and whatever. The New York Post has a new thing about that today, in fact. And I just don't know about that. The other guy,
Matt Gaetz was told. That's one of your things, like the Woodward thing. Matt Gaetz was told it was Iran. Remember? Remember he was told, he came out of the skiff and they told me that it was Iran. I'm like, you mean the same guys that you're going to go after you get into power? And like, what? Once again, there's that spin, right?
Yeah, that was stupid. But look, then, and that's not going anywhere because there's nothing to that. But then the guy that tried to kill him in Florida was clearly doing it on behalf of Ukraine, right? I mean, there's footage of him palling around with the Azov battalion there. So we don't know that they like recruited him to do it, but at the very least, he did it out of sympathy with them and to try to stop Trump from doing exactly what he's doing now, trying to stop the war. So like, I don't know. I already don't like these guys, but if the Azov battalion tried to kill me, I would like them even less than that. You know what I mean? I don't know. So I could see how Donald Trump is just like, listen, despite all the propaganda about Russia, Ukraine actually did intervene in the election of 2016. They forged these additional entries in the Paul Manafort ledger to make it look like he had left the country with all this cash and whatever. It's a total joke. None of it was true. It was later completely debunked, but it was the Ukrainian embassy in the United States that was working on manufacturing that stuff and putting it into the stream and getting him fired and spinning this whole story about how he was Donald Trump's agent controlling, Vladimir Putin's agent controlling Donald Trump and all this stuff. And so I'm sure he holds a grudge about that. And now I'm sure he's just like feeling it, that before he was just overwhelmed by all of these officials and all of their titles. He didn't have a trusted group of people to rely on. And just that whole dynamic has changed. Oh, and then also, this is a scene straight out of Sopranos where the cops are in there literally rifling through his wife's unmentionables in their private home. And this is the former president of the United States from just like a year ago at the time. And you guarantee this is like Obama mocking him and going, yeah, but the difference between you and me is you'll never be president, Donald. This is the same kind of thing. Oh, you're going to have your goons put their hands on my wife's underwear? I'm going to be the president again, and I'm going to ruin your life. It's on, right? Like, what would you do if you had the ability to if you were him and could get reelected again? Who's going to stand in your way? Ron DeSanctimonious? Yeah, right. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, vendetta time. And so I don't love the guy. I think, to me, his Zionism is just the most arsenic of poison pills. I just absolutely hate it. And he threatened to kill the civilian population of Gaza in plain language yesterday. And it's the worst millstone around his neck. It's like the slavery and the founding of America. It is just this absolute horrific, glaring flaw in America first and making America great again is this devotion to Israel. And it just taints every other thing that he's doing. So I can't be like a pro him guy, but I can
tough,
always
yeah.
glory in the crushing of his enemies. Today, for example, he suspended the security clearance from the law firm Perkins Coie. I know, or I think it might be Cooey. Someone told me they heard it said that way one time. These are the people who helped frame him for treason in Russiagate. They were behind the DNC leak attribution. They were behind the Yada phones and the DNS and the Alpha Bank hoax and all of that. And so he's getting his revenge. Depriving them of their security clearance means that their lawyers can't work national security type cases that they specialize in Washington. I hope they go out of business. Hope they all jump out a window. And they're just getting started. I mean, there was a leak. Nobody made much of a deal about this, but there was a small story in the Washington Times the other day about how, and I'm not sure if this is the same story I already know about. Remember in my Russiagate section where I talk about how they tried to do a honey trap with Papadopoulos and try to have, it was clearly the FBI was behind this. All hail Matt Taibbi. I'm almost certain his journalism is behind me knowing that. But I'm not sure if this is the same honeypot they're talking about or not. But in the Washington Times, they said they had these other reports that there were 2 off the books honeypot women who the FBI had insinuated into the Trump campaign in 2016. And now Kash Patel and his right-hand man, Dan Bongino, are going to get to the bottom of it. And then these guys are Trump guys. And
Bongino, come on. He goes on Timcast and he literally says, I got this guy high up in news that tells me that some Middle East company or Middle East countries actually in charge of the Epstein thing. Which one was it? Well, I didn't ask. He didn't tell me that. Come on. He didn't tell you which Middle East country it was?
Look,
come on, man.
I'm not saying the guy's one of us. I'm saying he's one of Trump. That's what I'm saying. Is that he is not, Jeff Sessions and what's his name? Rosenstein up there running DOJ. He's got his own guys running DOJ now. I think he should have picked Jonathan Turley to be Attorney General, and then he should have made, I don't know. This Pam Bondi lady should have stayed in Florida.
That might still happen with her little flub going on right now. Like that might.
What happened with that? She flubbed.
Well, the whole thing with Epstein, the way it was released and the way she talked and the way she kind of made herself look really badly there.
Well, we'll see.
And you know how Trump turns. He's like, okay, I'm done.
And Jonathan Turley is by far the superior choice to be Attorney General right now. And he's a pro-Trump guy and he's a brilliant lawyer. And so he definitely should have been the one in the first place to get that job before Gates or anybody. It should have been him. But anyway, he's got 2 very loyal guys at FBI who, if they want to, can go after his enemies big time. What I guess I would like to see, what I think is probably would be the best way to proceed would be to have just absolute full declassification and disclosure of everything the FBI and the CIA have in their files on all of his enemies, and even put it all together in indictment form, and then say, well, look, we're not going to convene a grand jury and indict Hillary Clinton, but we are turning over this dossier on her to the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post.
We'll make it aluminum or platinum or something. We won't make it steel, but
yeah, that's right. That they should come up with a funny metal pun for sure. And then go ahead and do this to all of their enemies. Put out, because they don't want to get bogged down in accusations of unwarranted political prosecutions and persecutions of their political enemies and whatever. I think they'd like to avoid that. But so what you could do is you could just put out a massive indictment and then say, listen, and in fact, go ahead and have the grand jury do it. And go ahead and have it be a real indictment and then say, well, listen, but we're going to choose not to pursue these charges because of the political nature of the situation means that we can't. However, we invite every investigative journalist in America to dig through this indictment and all the supporting documentation that we have for you and have a ball. And you know what? And you can go after the war party and all the enemies on the Republican side too. Go ahead and ruin their lives, man. They all deserve it, every one of them. And so
The
I
more I
think
became libertarian, the more I thought I'd be friends with both sides, and the more I'm finding both sides hate me more. It's
yeah,
like, dude, nobody's right, man. We're all wrong. That's the point. We're all flawed. So let us
there's
be.
so much,
That's it.
but like Jacob's saying, there's so much redeemable about the right now, and just the absolute opposite is true about the liberals and the left at this point. Like, we have our very favorite leftist journalists like Greenwald and Blumenthal and whoever, but
Well, they get
otherwise
lumped
the
in with the
entire
right now anyway,
Scott, I
right?
do
It's
need to
like,
share this one Facebook post. So I post this whole thing. I get back and forth. I call it the Boomer Social Network, and I post that we're having you on tonight. And I welcome a handful of people that are progressive, and I literally say, guys, please join us. We'd love for you to join the chat and ask a question. The response from this progressive guy who's probably 55, 60, I don't want to say his name. He goes, sorry, not interested in hearing from a member of a right-wing fringe group like libertarians. They've lost their minds. This guy probably protested Vietnam and probably Iraq. And here he is calling you right-wing fringe libertarian. Like, help me understand what happened. What happened to this group?
Well, I mean, man, a lot of people blamed it all on Obama, but really the way I remember it was Nancy Pelosi climbed up on Cindy Sheehan's back in order to retake the House of Representatives in the election of '06. And the Democrats won the House and the Senate. And then they immediately turned around and funded the expansion of the war and the surge of '07 and completely betrayed all of the anti-war sentiment that got them their place back. And then what did the left say? What did the progressives and the anti-war movement say to that? Nothing. And then Barack Obama came and he looked like he was a click or two to the left of Hillary Clinton. And so he satisfied all of those emotions on the liberal, progressive, leftist side, the more liberal, more leftist side, while actually being nothing but Hillary Clinton herself the whole time. And so you had, the perfect camouflage for being as center left as could possibly be in his presidency, and but placated the so-called progressives, or and in fact, look at even his calculation to escalate the war in Afghanistan in 2009. I just talked about that Bob Woodward book. It's actually a very valuable book, Obama's Wars, all about how they essentially just forced him to do it. They extorted him into expanding the war. And his calculation was, if I do this, he made an explicit deal with Lindsey Graham and John McCain. Give them another 30, and that was on top of the 40 he'd already given them. So give them a total of 70,000 extra troops, and we promise to shut up and leave you alone. And so that was an explicit handshake deal that he made with Lindsey Graham on behalf of John McCain, he just beat in the election a year ago, but was going to be the leading voice of the dissenting hawks, calling him a wimp in the Senate for the long term. So the other side of the calculation was, if I do this, is it going to make my left-wing supporters mad? And his answer was no, they won't give a damn. So he'll be able to placate John McCain, but it's not going to really bother the people who support him if he triples the war. They're going to look away. He's going to promise them a new healthcare program and whatever, and they're going to avert their eyes. He's going to flash them a big smile and make them feel nice, and then triple the war. And he was right. He was right. That worked. It shut up John McCain and Lindsey Graham, and he expanded the war. And the only people who really said anything was like the very heart of the anti-war movement, like the best, writers and activists and protesters who, people sell code pink short and say that they quit the field. Well, their membership largely did, but their leaders sure didn't. Right. Same as like Glenn Greenwald and Max Blumenthal and the people at the Gray Zone and other places like that who stayed really great. But a whole lot of them, man, they just sold their soul to politics. It's easy to oppose George Bush waging a war in an oil country, right? Like, you don't have to know nothing to just be like, well, I don't trust the Houston guys to make this Middle East policy, right?
Well,
and then
the weird thing to me, and this will be like my last thing here, question, and then Scott, you can maybe say something before we close out, but it just, so I came from the left, and I remember when the left was very skeptical of like everything America did. I don't know when that changed. When suddenly it's like it's not that the roles have completely flipped, but
Oh,
they
I
have
have
in
an
some
answer to
weird
this.
ways.
So this is what really did it, right? Was Russiagate. Because
That
what
did a lot
happened
of it.
was when Trump came in, the whole government kind of, released their antibodies against this plague, right? To isolate him and prevent him from exercising power. And so the liberals and the leftists, it's not even that they were siding with the CIA and the FBI. The CIA and the FBI were siding with them. That the state itself hates the president and sides with you against him and wants to work to limit his power, even to impeach him and overthrow him out of office. And so you saw the same dynamic in Egypt after the revolution there. It was the entire political spectrum. And I know that NED money and USAID money had a lot to do with the groups who helped to foment the revolution, but it very quickly got out of control and it became a very popular revolution across the whole country. And then they held elections and the Muslim Brotherhood won barely in late 2011. And they won the parliament and the presidency, again, just barely. But when their guy took power, the entire government just completely refused to do what he said. They wouldn't collect the garbage. They wouldn't keep the lights on. They wouldn't, keep the water running. They wouldn't, do basic policing services and whatever. They just essentially went on strike, or at least, massive work slowdown against him. And then the liberal parties of the students and the socialist unions and whatever intellectuals and whatever wanted to, from the bigger cities who wanted to form more liberal parties, call them the left side, not the left, like leftist communists, but like the liberal side or the left to the right. And, an imperfect analogy to our conservatives and liberals here, but something like that. Instead of working really hard to create a new Democratic Party to oppose the Muslim Brotherhood, they didn't want to do that. So instead, they just took a bunch of Saudi money to stay outside and protest and say, we hate the new conservative government. And then they ended up being the pressure from below that justified a military coup d'etat that overthrew the conservative religious party and reinstalled what? A right-wing military dictatorship. So how liberal and democratic is that? But where they could have recognized that they had won themselves a democratic system. It didn't matter that they lost the last election. Better luck next time. But the question is whether the Muslim Brotherhood is going to stand for election and whether they're going to step out of the way if they lose. And all indications were yes. You can have a two-party democracy in Egypt for the first time in 5,000 years. Get your shit together. And instead, they sided with the military dictatorship. They sided with the permanent state against the right-wing party. And then this became obvious to me immediately with Trump and the Russiagate scandal. That you see, it's exactly the same thing that's happening here. Is the liberals don't understand. They're destroying having a representative system at all.
Well, and that's
in the
funny
name of
thing. It's
siding
like,
with the secret police against the elected president that they can't stand the fact that they lost an election to. When
right.
you're trying to preserve democracy, respecting the fact that the other side wins sometimes is a big part of that. And they refuse to do that. And they're sacrificing democracy itself in the name of protecting it because
Well,
there's
it's a twisted thing when we're sitting here as libertarians who actually don't really want to defend democracy, but then having to go to the people going, we're defending democracy, going, no, you're not really.
Well, and compared to what, right? I
Right.
mean, if democracy means protection for, individual minority rights and tripartite government and a bicameral Congress and regular elections instead of a military dictatorship or a royal monarchy, then yes, sign me up for Thomas Jefferson, man. I would much
Yes.
rather have the American way than that. And so when
But we're so
democracy is bad, we have a lot of things about democracy that we don't like, but our solution as libertarians is always liberty and private
Right.
property, not strongman rule,
Yes.
which is what the liberals, seem to prefer to what they say,
Yep. Scott, but the thing I got away from this book the most, which I want to get your response to before we close, was that a lot of people seem to read this book or read if they don't read the book, they read the snippets, or they read people who are supporting these arguments and go, well, it just looks like you're trying to defend Russia and make Putin to be a saint. And it's like, that's really not the point of the book at all. If you read it, you are, very quick to call out the failures of all the Russian leaders and the Russian government and point out their own flaws.
Yeah.
The point here is not to defend Russia. The point here is to point out that America is not the good guy. And I think some people are even, so I have a close friend of mine who has been talking about this for a while, and he was like, okay, so maybe America's not the good guy, but like, shouldn't we, even if we're not the good guy, do something about what's going on now? Even if we helped cause it, maybe we need to at least now turn course. I'm like, that's disconnected from reality. Like, and I think the most important thing we have to understand here is that, like, these things don't exist in a vacuum, right? And if we do not understand that, what, like, the totality of the actions that led us to here, and the extent to which the American government and all its different agencies and NGOs and whatnot have contributed to this, and that they have not been the good guys in this, last 3 decades since the end of the Cold War, then it doesn't matter how much you hope and pray just with good feelings that, like, oh, but like, it's not good that Russia invaded Ukraine, and like, we shouldn't, excuse that. It's like, and you point out in the book other things Putin could have done other than invade. You don't defend the invasion. The point is just that it's like, are you going to trust the government that did Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and supports Israel with what they do in Gaza and all the other things, and also like has supported all of the terrorism that has been going on over in the eastern part of the world too, including stuff that's been destabilizing the regions around Russia? It's like, you're going to come and tell me that, like, yeah, we've been bad all the way up into this point, but now, we're the good guys. Or now we can act for, it's like, the only way, like, we can't act good abroad, whatever that looks like, until we can actually get back to what are, like you just pointed out, the values of Thomas Jefferson. How can we promote the values of Thomas Jefferson around the world when we don't have them here?
Right.
Like, we're just not going to be able to, and it's just disconnected from reality to hope and think otherwise.
Well, look, I mean, there's a few things you're bringing up here. I mean, one of the obvious answers to what's going on here is simple partisanship, and I look at that as essentially a crutch for weak-minded people, because after all, it sucks to always hate the government. You're supposed to pick one side or the other and be essentially appeased and placated half the time. That's what Carol Quigley said, right? That's the purpose of the two parties, so that the people can throw those rascals out every 4 or 8 years and switch parties back and forth without ever leading to a substantial shift in policy. That's the kind of purpose of the thing, right? Is so that you have a team to root for. And so your buddy who's saying, yeah, but what about this? His problem is he's a Democrat, and this is the Democrats' policy. And so he's gay married to it and thinks that he has to somehow identify with it. Otherwise, it's like, remember, there was a time where, like, liberals, even years after, they would not take off their mask, because to not wear a mask was the same as wearing a red hat and saying that you're pro-Trump, and they couldn't do that. So they had to be mask people so that they wouldn't be confused for being Trump people, this kind of deal. And so they, and so it's an escape from having to just deal with the fact that, no, man, these guys are just as bad as those guys. And usually both sides are worse than each other on everything. And so, like even Donald Trump promising to kill all the innocent civilians of Gaza. Well, Joe Biden actually did kill them all, almost 100,000 of them. Right. So I don't know. Like,
and the casualty numbers. What, 1.8 million? Where'd you get? You were at 2.2. So there's 400,000 missing. Well, and then we've got the Ukraine casualty numbers. What are the numbers?
Say that Donald Trump's numbers are always wrong. Always.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
If he's underestimating the people of Gaza, it's because he's trying to make it sound like a smaller number of people to be packed up and moved out. Not because he secretly knows
makes total sense. Okay, that's a good point.
yeah, hundreds of thousands
But
higher.
like the Ukraine thing, I'm still foggy on the numbers on that because that's
Well,
the thing that just
it's
absolutely
high tens of
bothers me.
thousands minimum, and it could be more than that. But the people go, oh, Hamas exaggerates. No, Hamas issues only the most conservative body counts that they can. They don't report all the missing, or they keep all the missing and buried alive and presumed dead in separate categories from the confirmed dead. It's just like Iraq body count in the war. They counted them one at a time. But meanwhile, people could extrapolate out and go, a lot more people than this are dying. But these are just the ones that they have the names and dates and times of where they died and everything to actually have double verified and add to the individual list of people. But, I think the official number is high 40s. But the real number must be much higher than that, especially when you take into account all the people who are buried alive in the rubble, and many of whom will never be recovered because the Israelis already bulldozed it all, and et cetera.
Sad. So sad.
But
and that's definitely like, even if Trump ends the stuff going on in Ukraine, man, I mean,
this
like
is the next fight.
We as a Liberty Movement have to, we can't get too caught up. Like, even if we get some wins here with Ukraine or other things Trump is doing, we can't relent 1 minute for all the other things that are going on. I think we would all.
But what? Back to your friend though for a second is, as you said, the book is not written from a pro-Russian point of view. I don't give a damn about Russia, and I wasn't trying to impress anyone by how little I give a damn about Russia by writing it the way I write it. I just say exactly what I think about things, and I don't have really any reason to favor them. But like, your friend is still a big fat wimp. Like, what if the book was called Russia's Lawyer, and I was just being John Adams defending the guys at the Boston Massacre? This is what Jude Winograd, he was a former neoconservative who became a paleoconservative and an anti-war guy at the end of the Cold War. But when Iraq War II was breaking out, he spent 2002 saying, fine, I'll represent Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is not guilty of the following things. And he said it like you would hire a badass, brilliant Jewish lawyer to get out there and tell everybody your side of the case. And unashamedly, that's the job. It's an adversarial process in the court of law. He doesn't have to love you. He just has to pretend that he does and get up there and preach your case as best as he possibly can. And then Jude Winograd, I guess I remember him saying from time to time something along the lines of, geez, try to get a hold of your tiny feminine emotions, guys. As I tell you Saddam Hussein's side of the story here, are you really not man enough to read black type on a white page that tells you that something that you want to believe isn't actually accurate? Oh, where you just love Saddam Hussein. No, I'm just Saddam Hussein's lawyer. Okay, that was what Jude Winograd did. And he was almost right about everything. I think he let Saddam off for gassing the Kurds at Halabja and blamed that on Iran, which was not really true. It was the Iraqis that did that. But otherwise, Jude was right about all that stuff. Everything that he said, debunking the case for war, was right. And so, what if that was the book? What if the book was, wow, I just got back from Russia and I love it so much and I can't wait to help convince you guys that their side of the story is right. Well, my claims and my footnotes either hold up or they don't. My side of the story is either true or it ain't. And how could a grown-ass man be so emotional that he would be essentially afraid, is what you're describing, to read something that comes from such the other side of the story? From what? From what he wants to hear. Oh, where? Are you sure this book isn't just praising Putin? What if it was? You wouldn't be able to finish for all the tears in your eyes?
I had to watch this thing, to do this book review. I had to watch the Kathy Young debate multiple times, Scott. You have no idea how much hell that was, my friend.
Talk about Brian.
But before we go, I know we're going to go here shortly, but I just want to express this to our audience. You are an amazing person, because I reached out and asked you to review a debate that I did, and you gave me some constructive feedback, and just that you took that time shows that you care about the message. And we are just all messengers on this ship right now. We're hoping to elevate to a level that you're at. We're able to write and produce the things that you do. Right now, we're still messengers and trying to get our voice and learn these things. But I just want to say, that you are able to do that for anyone that we've never met. We've only spoken twice. We've never met. And that you did that for a person because the message of the liberty that we're looking for. And I'm just grateful. And I just want to thank you for offering yourself for that.
Well, sure, man. Yeah, I'm happy to help at all times. And again, I can tell you guys how much I appreciate your interest in this book and in doing this project, this kind of book club that you've put together here about it and going through it all and all that. It matters a lot to me that it means that much to you to go through it and want to learn everything that's in there. It's why the book is so thick. I couldn't help myself. That's essentially everything that I know that I could tell you that's not already enough already.
Right.
And the books do kind of go together because there's a lot of support for terrorism in that book. And so I think, especially if you read the two back to back, I'm not sure which is the best order to read them in, but if you read the two back to back, well, sir, I guess, well, it depends. If you want to know them both, then, and you're going to do them both, then maybe do enough already first. Cause I wrote it first and it's about all the Middle East stuff that all came to a head, mostly all before this current time. If you're more interested in what's going on right now, obviously you read Provoked, but I think if you read enough already, then when you read Provoked and you have all that enough already stuff still kind of looming in the background that you still remember that, like, oh, that's that same guy from the other thing or whatever it is that, I hope that makes it a little more
Groundhog Day, and we never learn our lesson. It is crazy watching the same. It is literally the Einstein insanity. It's unbelievable.
Again, there were so many times where we would meet, and I'd go like, "Oh yeah, it's like it feels like Groundhog Day. It feels like we were just here last week. We're doing the same stuff over and over again."
Scott, I know, and like you would think too that I'm being unfair to people the way like I always pick on Francis Fukuyama and Fiona Hill and James Clapper and a few others of these characters. But it's like it's not my fault that they
Fukuyama on Pierce today. I'm like laughing. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Who was on there?
Fukuyama was on there.
Oh yeah.
A day or two ago.
Yeah. And yeah, of course, I make mincemeat out of him in the book. And yeah, like you might think like, geez, Scott Horton just really carries a vendetta against this Fukuyama guy, which yes, is true. But it's not my fault that he's part of the story all along and he keeps making himself part of the story. Like this is what your end of history looks like, Francis, palling around with Azov Battalion guys at Stanford,
Well, we are over time. Scott, I appreciate this conversation so much. Appreciate the book and all you do. Remind people where they can find your stuff, the book, and all that before we go.
Okay. My show is at scotthorton.org. The audiobook is at scotthortonshow.com. I got the H.W. Bush and about half of Bill Clinton up there. I recorded some more Bill Clinton for you yesterday. I'm working on it. Then what did I say? scotthorton.org, scotthortonshow.com, antiwar.com, libertarianinstitute.org, and of course Amazon.com. And read up, everyone. And thank you guys both so much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you again. And can you mention your team, like Kyle and everybody too, just because your whole team on there, they're the messengers. Once again, this is all about the message because we got to get these people. I mean, people are listening now. So thank you again for everything.
Yeah. Well, so at antiwar.com, it's Eric Garris, Dave DeCamp, Jason Ditz, Kyle Anzalone, and then all of our great writers, Ted Snyder, Ramsey Baroud, and I don't know this thing. And then over at the Libertarian Institute, we also have Kyle. He wears both hats there. And then of course there's the legends, Jim Bovard, Sheldon Richman, the great Lori Calhoun, and Ted Galen Carpenter, who's formerly at Cato but got fired for being way too good, so now he writes for me. And then the whole younger generation of guys. I mentioned Kyle, but there's Connor Freeman and Hunter Durensis, and of course Patrick McFarlane and our old friend Tommy Salmons, as all our great podcasters. We're bringing on more and more new great writers. We have the great Brad Pierce is one of the sharpest foreign policy analysts around these days. Jose Nino, who is kind of a right-leaning libertarian writer. We recently brought him on. And we have a brand new writer that I just started publishing recently named Matt Wolfson, who he goes on by the Twitter handle XLeft. And I just had a really interesting conversation with him yesterday. He's actually not just ex-left, but ex-close associate of many very horrible neocons, and is very, very well versed in their entire culture and network and way of life up there in the bad guy corridor between Washington and New York there. So he promises to be writing some really great stuff for us. And then, and I should have mentioned William Bupert is our infantry officer and military intelligence officer, writer, one of America's greatest critic of counterinsurgency doctrine and its stupidity, a veteran of the Afghan war and other things. And I'm so sorry for whoever all I'm forgetting. I know I'm forgetting people. Tom Woods is on our board of directors. We published Tom Woods' great book. And Joe Solis Mullins. I should mention our Austrian school economists, Joe Solis Mullins, Tom Edlum, and Dan Sanchez. All three are credentialed Austrian school guys. We just published Joe Solis Mullins' recent book, The National Debt and You. We published insanely good articles by Tom Edlum. He is just a genius, including one about crony capitalism that's on the site right now. And and you know who else we're publishing is James Rushmore, who you might know as Matt Taibbi's co-author at some of the work that they did on the Twitter files and the FOIA files over there. And he's now writing for us too. In fact, I'm pretty sure, guys, that this is my biggest tweet ever, was my tweet of his article about the Israel lobby targeting Thomas Massie if he tries to run for Senate. And that got 12 or 13,000 likes and more than 1,000 retweets. I'm pretty sure that's the highest performing tweet I ever tweeted, was this article by James Rushmore. It's a very well done piece about the Israel lobby's vendetta against Massie. Not that he ever did anything against them, just that he doesn't support them, and that's enough. So
he beat the 300,000 against him from AIPAC for his
congressional run. Make a difference, I'm sure.
And you mentioned Tom Woods, and I'd like to just mention Tom Woods that you published that, because Diary of a Psychosis, everybody, read that book. It is just eye opener. It's about COVID, and
we've published 16 books so far, and we got more coming out. Kyle Anselm is working on 2 right now. We've got one by Ken Silva that's coming out. I don't want to tell you too much about it, but Ken Silva is a great investigative journalist from Headline USA. You may be familiar with him. He writes for us as well. And I swear this is true. I keep saying it and it keeps getting delayed, but William Van Wagenen has written a book about Obama's dirty war in Syria, the origins of the dirty war in Syria. And he just got back from Syria, where he is, as recently, this has been our recent delay, as he went back to Syria to write a chapter on Syria now after the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad last December. So, and this is just the highest quality stuff. And it is our fundraiser right now. And we have matching funds. We have $25,000 worth of matching funds. So anything that people donate immediately gets doubled up to $25,000. And we're trying to raise 60. And we don't have a big fancy office, and we don't have, plush carpets. We're all essentially just doing the work, and your dollar goes essentially straight to fighting for peace and freedom. So that's it. So that's the pitch. We got great kickbacks for you as well. And that's all at libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And
I can't.
And look, I don't like to brag and boast, but it's the same as I used to always say about my radio show. Like, look, I don't have all the best broadcasting skills, but I have an excellent taste in guests. And it's the same thing with the team I put together here at the Libertarian Institute. They're doing all the work. I'm just,
that's why I wanted to recognize it, because we're just blessed to have all these people contributing the way they're
so good. All of them are so good. Did I don't tell me I skipped Keith Knight. Keith Knight is
I think you did.
Yeah, I did.
You didn't now.
Glad I had
you got him. Keith's great.
So there's so many of these kids, and they're all 27 and whatever. I can't keep track anymore. There's too many guys. But look, I think look, man, I'll go ahead and boast it with a straight face. I think that the Libertarian Institute is second best after the Mises Institute in the whole world for awesomeness. And there's no way I could ever take away what Mises has accomplished.
I just had Perp Island on, so I know what you mean.
Yeah. No, these guys are the absolute cream of the crop, but we're second best compared to them. And I won't name names of the other major libertarian institutions, but I think we're better than all of them except Mises. And I'll be happy to take second place to those guys, because they're better than anyone could have ever hoped for. So,
and it's weird that the ideology is freedom and liberty. It's like, look, if I had the power, I'd want to use it. So knowing that, I don't want the power. I don't want anyone to have it because they'd use it. Simple. Thanks,
I'm
guys.
moving to Alabama.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here tonight. Thanks everybody for listening.
you.
Definitely, please support Scott and his work. I think if I can,
We'll put the
say
links
so
up.
humbly, Mises Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, and us here at LCI.
Oh yeah.
Say top 4, top 5 liberty institutions that you should be consuming, looking at daily, and supporting however you can. So thanks again, Scott, for everything you've done.
Thank
Look
you,
forward
Scott.
to next
Thank you
time we
again.
talk, and talking to you again soon, Mark. And shout out to Shawn, who couldn't be here tonight.
Thank you.
But
Shawn, sorry we miss you, buddy. We
yeah,
love
we'll,
you.
Next time.
We'll do it again soon. All right, talk to you guys.